Florida's housing market is booming right now. We are talking crazy levels of appreciation, record low inventory, and the cherry to top it all off, massive amounts of inbound migration, people heading to Florida, fleeing states in the Northeast and Midwest, coming to Florida for its freedom and warm weather. All of these things are making Florida's housing market go berserk right now in mid-2021. Now, I know the question that's on your mind as a potential home buyer or a real estate investor in Florida here is this. Should I buy now or should I wait? A lot of you have been asking me this question in the comments. You've been sending me emails, and it's a very, very good question. Because on one hand, when you see the crazy growth that Florida is experiencing, the inbound migration, the low inventory, you say to yourself, maybe I should buy now, because if I don't, things are just going to get more expensive. On the other hand, though, I think a lot of you know, Florida has a very volatile past as far as the real estate market. It's got actually a dirty little secret, and it's one of the most speculative housing markets in America that's very prone to seeing big upward surges in prices and then big declines thereafter. And so I know a lot of you want to sort through this. What is the future direction of Florida's housing market, and what are the best places within Florida on a county and metro basis to buy in 2021? I'm going to be answering those questions for you guys with data today. We're going to be taking a look at migration data across Florida, home price growth across Florida, inventory. We're going to come to some conclusions by the end of the video if, one, you should buy in Florida in general right now, and then two, what are the best areas within Florida to buy. You're not going to want to miss this one. I know a lot of you have been requesting this video, so let's get into it. And we're going to get started by looking at a key element of real estate demand in Florida. And I know this is something that you guys have heard a lot about. All of the migration to Florida, right? Tons and tons of people are moving to this state each year. It's actually the #1 state in terms of migration in America. The thing is, that migration isn't going to all areas of the state equally. And that's what we're looking at on this map. We're looking at every county in the state of Florida, and we're looking at a statistic called migration percentage. And what that number is measuring is basically the net migration into each county in 2019 and 2020 divided by the total population in 2020. So you can get a sense of how much the population has increased the last 2 years due to inbound migration. And for example, we can go to a place like Pasco County, which is in Tampa, the Tampa metro. We can see 35,000 people have migrated to Pasco County over the last 2 years based on a total population of 570. That's plus 6.1% migration percentage. That's one of the highest in Florida. And we can see a big splotch of red in this central to western Florida. Pasco County, Hernando County, Citrus County, Sumter County, which is in the Villages, and then the Lake County, which is on the west side of the Orlando metro. This has been a big area of positive inward migration in Florida, as has the southwestern coast. If we go down to Sarasota County and Northport, Sarasota, if we go to Charlotte County, if we go to Lee County and Cape Coral, these areas in the southwest have also seen a lot of inbound migration. Now, what I think some of you might have already noticed is very interesting. If we go to the southeast of Florida, particularly Miami and Fort Lauderdale, Miami-Dade and Broward counties, we can actually see that there's no real inward migration there. And in fact, Miami-Dade has lost people to migration over the last 2 years, meaning more people have moved out of Miami-Dade than moved in. That's a very surprising metric. I was kind of shocked when I saw that, but I think it speaks to how expensive a place like Miami is getting potentially. If we go further on this map, we can see that some other areas that are actually struggling would include Orange County and Seminole County, which are in Orlando. Those are like the two principal Orlando counties, as well as kind of the northwestern part of the state. Around Tallahassee, there's some outward migration. If we go to Bay County in Panama City, we have big outward migration, which is partially related to Hurricane Michael hitting two or 3 years ago. So what I want you to think about is not just as Florida receiving lots and lots of people, but those people being dispersed around Florida in a different way, because that's going to be really important for you to remember when you're picking the best areas to invest in from a real estate perspective. And migration is one of the building blocks of real estate demand. It's probably the biggest building block, right? Because you need people to be moving to your area, and you need your population to be growing in order for real estate demand to increase. It's simple supply and demand, to be honest. If you're adding more heads who need more beds, rental prices are going to go up, home prices are going to go up. So those counties in Florida that are receiving big levels of inward migration, not surprisingly, they've been the ones that have had the biggest price appreciation in their real estate markets over the last couple years. The more migration there's been, the higher price appreciation. The markets with lower migration, such as Miami-Dade, they haven't actually done as well in terms of price appreciation. It's super important to understand this on a micro basis. And so we're back here with the county level map of Florida, except now we have two maps. The first is the original map that we just looked at in terms of migration percentage. The map on the right is now the map of home price growth since the start of 2019. And you can immediately see there's a lot of correlation here. The areas that are in red in terms of migration, such as Citrus and Hernando and Pasco County and Sarasota County and Charlotte County. Those are the same areas that have really high price appreciation since the start of 2019. Like we can see here, Citrus, Hernando, Pasco, we've seen over 30% home price growth since the start of 2019. If we continue down the western coast, we just see plus 20%, plus 24%. Really strong price appreciation in the central and western part of the state that corresponds to the higher levels of migration. If you guys are enjoying the data in this video, make sure to hit that like button. I spend a lot of time putting this data together for you, potential home buyers, real estate investors out there. In return, if you enjoy it, just hit the like button. When you do that, it gets me more exposure on YouTube. And when I get more exposure, I can actually put more of this content out. Also, make sure to leave a comment, particularly if you're a home buyer or investor in Florida. I want to hear what you're seeing in the market. When you guys comment, it makes these videos better. All right, let's get back to it. If we also go all the way up into the Panhandle and look at places like Santa Rosa and Pensacola, Okaloosa and Crestview, Walton and Crestview, these areas have also had very high appreciation. Not coincidentally, also really good inward migration into counties such as Walton and Santa Rosa. The areas that struggled due to migration, this northwestern pocket here where people are moving out, well, they've also had lower home price growth, around 10%, 12%, 11%, 8%. And then the other area that struggled due to migration, Miami, Broward County, have also seen lower levels of home price growth. So this is kind of proof in the pudding that the migration levels are really important for you guys to look at. You need to understand this data before deciding when and where to buy in Florida. But that's not the only thing we need to look at here in Florida is local migration rates. The other thing we need to look at is historical context. Because the thing that we can't forget is that Florida, despite all its great growth, all its great migration, it's a very historically speculative and volatile real estate market. Prices tend to go up a lot, then they tend to go down, then they tend to go up. There's a lot of flippers and speculators and investors in the market, a lot of people buying second homes, a lot of demand that isn't very fundamental and that could turn into a big surge in listings all of a sudden if the market turns. So as a result, we just need to couch everything we're talking about here with the perspective that, hey, Florida has had a volatile real estate past, right? And understanding that volatile real estate past is important for making a more educated decision today. And you can start to get a perspective on Florida's real estate market more broadly by looking at its home price growth over the last 25 years, which is what this graph looks like. We're looking at year-over-year home price growth from 1997 to June 2021. And the areas in green are when Florida appreciates. The areas in red are when Florida declines. And we could see that on average, annual home price appreciation has been a bit over 4% annually over the last 25 years, but that average doesn't actually get hit each year. Florida tends to go well above that average like it did in 04, 05, 06. Then it went well below that average into heavily negative territory for a good 5 years from 2007 to 2012. Home prices in Florida went down by 50% in aggregate in this period. Then prices shot back up in 2013 in a recovery. And then interestingly, prices in Florida 2016, 2017, 2018, they started declining home price growth. And all the way to like 2020, late 2019, early 2020, home prices in Florida grew by a meager 3% in aggregate. So Florida's housing market was actually kind of going downward prior to COVID. But then the pandemic has since resuscitated Florida's housing market back up to 15% year-over-year appreciation through June. And so I think the question that you need to ask yourself here, if you're a home buyer and investor in Florida, is this surge to plus 15%, is this something real that's supported by fundamentals? Or is this something that's starting to look a little similar to what we were seeing in 04-05, where we have a big surge in prices that could be indicative of a big decline in prices coming around the corner? This is a very important question to ask. And so if you were to talk to a lot of people locally in Florida, whether they be realtors or local flippers, a lot of them are going to tell you this: Florida is growing and will continue to grow, and so just don't worry about it. Buy at today's prices, because prices are going to keep going up. There's all these people flooding to the state, and inventory is going to remain low, and you got nothing to worry about. I think that's what most people who operate in real estate in Florida would tell you, as someone who might be exercising some skepticism buying into Florida in 2021. The trouble is, we've seen this act before in Florida. It happened in 04, 05, 06. Crazy levels of appreciation, really low inventory, lots of people moving to Florida, the idea going that nothing bad can ever happen, and then something very bad did happen. The migration fell off. The prices collapsed, and a lot of people lost everything in Florida's housing market from 2007 to 2012. And that was a really, really serious collapse. And it was only about 10 to 12 years ago that happened. And I'm not saying that's going to happen again necessarily, but you just need to understand what Florida's housing market is like. It's very speculative. It's very boom or bust. Lots of realtors flood into the market, lots of out-of-state investors, and it's in their interest to convince you that prices will just continue to go up no matter what. So you got to do your due diligence. You got to look at data and decide for yourself. And one data point I'm going to show you right here, right now, are the overall migration levels into the state of Florida. How many people are actually moving into Florida? We know it's number one in America, but fundamentally, actually, how many people is that? And is that number going up or is it going down? So on this graph, we're looking at the aggregate migration, net migration into the state of Florida. And this is basically the numerator of that migration percentage data I showed you before, where we were dividing migration by total population. Now we're just looking at total migration into Florida year by year. And I think one thing that should stick out to you immediately, this is what stuck out to me immediately, is that Florida's migration in 2020 at plus 253,000 was lower than it was 3 or 4 years ago. Yeah, so Florida's migration recently actually peaked in like 2015, 2016, 2017 at over 330,000 people per year. Since then, it's declined to about 230 to 250,000 over the last couple of years. And that's a really interesting thing to think about, because that runs very counter to the popular narrative of like, oh my God, people are fleeing New York at a level they never have and moving to Florida, and it's going to cause so much real estate demand. Well, that's actually not what the U.S. Census migration estimates are showing. In fact, the estimates are showing that Florida's current migration is like pretty close in line to what its long-term migration is. And this is a really important data set to look at, because I have a sense that there's a lot of people in Florida right now who are trying to sell you on a dream of, oh my God, there's just a never-ending wave of people migrating here and it's the highest it's ever been. Well, it's actually not. It's not the highest it's ever been. It's actually lower than it was 4 or 5 years ago, yet home prices are going up a lot faster now than they were 5 years ago. The other interesting thing to look at on this graph is back in 04-05. Florida had huge inward migration in 04-05, kind of leading up to the peak of the last housing bubble, and then that migration dropped off a cliff as the housing bubble collapsed. And that's another important thing to remember when you deal with a high migration market like Florida. Don't necessarily assume that high levels of migration are fixed and continue to stay and won't ever go down, because they can go down, and they got crushed in 08, 09, 2010, and that exacerbated the housing crash. And I'm not saying this to just be overly cynical. I'm saying this as someone who's spent a lot of time studying past real estate data and the things that are indicative of housing surges and housing crashes. And Florida meets a lot of the criteria for being a speculative market that could be heading towards another housing crash. I don't think we're going to see another 50% decline like we did from 2007 to 2012, but I certainly think like a 20 to 25% decline could certainly happen, especially in specific parts of the state. And it's now that we need to really sharpen our pencil again and go back to thinking about Florida on that county and metro level. Where are the areas in Florida most at risk for the next housing crash? Where are the areas that are most stable? And to answer this question, I want to go back to the migration numbers on a county level, Because remember, we were kind of seeing that it was like the smaller central western counties that had the most migration, the bigger southeastern counties had the least. How does that migration look historically, county by county? And what does that tell us about the future of Florida's real estate market? So we got a bunch of lines on this graph, guys. Don't turn away just yet. I know it's an intimidating graph, but I'm going to explain what this means over the next 60 seconds. So each line on this graph is a different county in Florida. And what we're looking at is the migration percentage, again, the total number of people migrating into the county divided by the total population in each year. What the color coding shows is the more red the line looks, like for instance, Sumter County and the Villages, the higher the migration percentage. The bluer the line looks, the lower the migration percentage. So we talked about how Miami-Dade is actually losing people. But what I also want you to pay attention to is the size of the line. The thicker the line is, the higher the population of that county, the bigger the county is. And what becomes immediately apparent is that the bigger counties, the thicker lines like Miami-Dade, Broward, Orange County and Orlando, Palm Beach and Miami, Hillsborough and Tampa, the thicker counties have like less migration in general, a lower migration percentage, and then more stability in migration year by year. What you can see, especially if we go back to 0405, we had some counties in Florida, some small, thin line counties like Flagler, which had crazy levels of migration that then just fell off an absolute cliff. Same thing happened in the Villages, 2004, 2005. Same thing happened in St. Johns County in Jacksonville, in Lake County in Orlando. A lot of these thin line, small counties had a big collapse in migration during the last housing crash. Whereas the bigger counties, the Miami-Dades and the Browards and the Hillsboroughs and the Oranges, they had, a decline. You could see a decline in these counties occurring, but it wasn't really by much. And they've generally stayed in the same range of maybe like a little bit of a migration loss to a little bit of a migration gain. So they have a lot more stability. And so what that says is that if anything goes wrong, right, if anything causes that migration to dip, which could in itself be a real estate crash in that market. It could be that other parts of Florida get better. It could happen for a variety of reasons, that migration into places like St. Johns County and Pasco and Hernando and Sarasota. If anything happens that causes migration to dip, you then have problems in that housing market because prices were kind of growing, expecting continued migration, as was housing supply building and permitting. And so I want you guys to think of this way. High migration is not necessarily a good thing here in mid-2021. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but it's not necessarily a good thing, especially if prices are accelerating at crazy, crazy levels. If you're someone who values investment security, and above all, you just want to buy a property, whether you're a home buyer or a real estate investor, and you just want to make sure that property doesn't decline in values, well, buying into those high migration, high appreciation counties gives you a lot of downside. It's probably not what you want to do, especially if you go back to the last housing crash. Some of those counties were the ones that got hit the hardest in that last housing crash in Florida. The one other thing that we actually want to think about in Florida is age. It's no secret Florida is a big retirement destination, and particular areas around the state are very old. And that's fine, right? But from a housing market perspective and a housing appreciation perspective, you might not want to buy into areas with a high elderly population, because the demographics in America are shifting as such that the baby boomer generation is now reaching the age where a lot of baby boomers are unfortunately going to go into nursing homes and die. And when that happens, towns, areas, zip codes, counties with a very high ownership share of elderly homeowners are going to start struggling from a housing market perspective, because when the elderly homeowner leaves the home, goes into a nursing home, or unfortunately dies, that's going to put the home back onto the market for sale. So not only would I avoid counties in Florida with super high appreciation and migration levels, I would also avoid counties that have a very high elderly homeowner population. And so that's what we're looking at on this map. The percentage of homeowners in each county that are over the age of 65. And we can see that this goes from a low of like 29% or 30% in Miami-Dade, Broward, to a high of 67% in Sumter County in the Villages, where 67% of homeowners are 65 years or older. And basically, any county in red here has a high share of elderly homeowners. Charlotte County and Punta Gorda, Sarasota County in Northport has 52% of homeowners being elderly. Citrus County has 52% of homeowners being elderly. And again, to be clear, this is nothing against elderly people, but this is just the realities of over the next 5 to 10 years, just with simple aging, a lot of these people will be dying and releasing their homes into the market, which will put downward pressure on prices. So to be frank, Florida more generally, I'm a bit concerned about based on the behavior in the market over the last 6 months. I probably, if it were me, I'm not buying in Florida right now. I think prices will be going down. But if I did have to buy in Florida, if I was a home buyer moving to Florida, if I was a real estate investor who wanted to buy in Florida, I would likely prioritize those larger, denser counties in those bigger metros that have more stability in terms of their year-to-year migration, that have more stability in terms of their prices, and that also have a younger homeowner population that's likely to stay in their home over the next decade. So as always, I love bringing data to the discussion for real estate investors and home buyers, and I hope you found this video helpful. If you did and you want to see more of this content going forward, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Amazingly, only 15% of my views come from subscribers, so I want to get that subscriber view count up. I'd love to have you as a subscriber, particularly if you enjoyed this content. Additionally, I'm actually going to be coming out with a monthly newsletter soon. A monthly newsletter is going to have updates on markets across the country on things like home price growth, job growth, migration levels. This is going to be key data. I'm going to be rolling out this newsletter next month. If you want to be put on the list to be informed for when this newsletter comes out, visit my website and submit a contact form below so I have your email. I'll be sending out some notifications on this over the coming weeks. All right, guys, until next time, this is Nick from ReVenture Consulting signing off.